Innocence of Muslims video. So basically it was an unauthorized protest which turned into a riot by which people scuffled with police. 8 police officers were injured. Some people were arrested. And it's kind of famous around the world right now because of the picture of a little kid holding up a sign saying, "Behead those who depict Muhammad or offend Muhammad," something like that. So, I mean, the very first thing is, reflecting on it, I was thinking, well, how would I have felt if it had been a left-wing group doing a spontaneous protest and they'd scuffled with the police? I probably would have had less problem with it than I would have in this instance. But actually, the way I reason, those people that attacked the police, that was wrong. It would have been wrong if it had been a left-wing protest as well, the scuffling. So there's not really an excuse there for me. But moving on to the obvious elephant in the room, people were holding up signs that were vile and reprehensible, and that is also terrible. Now, the one thing you never quite get this sense of is how widespread this signage was. You see some examples, but were these the only people holding up signs? But I'm gonna say probably not. I mean, from everything I understand about this protest, it was quite ugly and quite mean-spirited. So I think the general sense was one that I would have been very uncomfortable with, and I think a lot of people would have been very uncomfortable with. Then the last point, what it was about this video, which was something that some American guy made for $500 by the looks of it, and it had nothing to do really with America, or especially nothing to do with Australia. So it's obvious that this group of Muslims were just looking for an excuse to stage an angry protest, and that at least a subgroup of these Muslims were then willing to take that into violence. In summary, I think this event was a terrible idea, and it was nasty. Especially the injury to people is just unacceptable. And I think it displays to some extent this attitude of wanting to be beleaguered by some Muslims. They want to feel like they're being attacked, and they want to then be able to take the fight back to the oppressor. And actually, I don't think that's especially a Muslim trait. I think more it has to do with people looking for their place in the world and people wanting to have something to fight for and some ideals to strive for. And people have difficulties finding that in the modern world. And so a lot of religious people, especially Muslims, seem to be finding that in extreme expressions of their faith, which is obviously not a good thing. Now, the other thing I want to say to this is, I understand why Muslims riot, say, in Egypt. When their imam tells them that there's this horrible movie, a lot of them probably don't speak good English. A lot of them probably don't even have access to the internet or to this movie or to news sources that would explain anything about it. So the only sources they have are ones that probably tell them, well, this is a movie, it's showing everywhere in the cinemas right now. It's the best super hit in the world and everyone's hating on us. After that, I think it's understandable, not necessarily, certainly violence is never excusable, but it's understandable why people would be upset and would go on the streets. But in Australia, these people have access to all this information. They should know better. I think the fact that they either don't know better or don't want to know better is disturbing, and is something where people should do a lot of soul searching in that community as to what's going on there. Another thing, of course, is this was, I think, 1,000 people. There's a lot of Muslims in Australia. So you can't just say, look at those Muslims, that's exactly what we expected. What you saw there was a bunch of people who were either just ignorant or willfully ignorant. And now, when I originally made this video, I was really angry at these protesters, and I was kind of upset with, I suppose, the Muslim community for, I was upset in advance because I didn't know how the Muslim community would respond. And it was really something where I think it was definitely a place for this to be condemned by the community. That was kind of the responsibility of the Muslim community to condemn this. Just like I think, say, it's the responsibility of the Christian and atheist community to condemn the protests of the 9/11 mosque, because those were likewise, in my eyes, reprehensible. Although they didn't lead to violence, I think, so that's definitely a difference that you also have to put in there. Violence is worse than anything else. And so the reason why I then waited, because I made that video pissed, and I wanted to see what the response is. And the responses made me feel much better. So one of the high leaders of Muslims in Australia, like religious leaders, has come out against it, condemned violence. The Muslim Friendship Council of Australia, so one of those associations that's kind of represents Muslims, has come out strongly against violence and against this form of protest. And various other voices have been speaking up against it. And really, I mean, on a kind of a community level, I haven't heard much in favor of. I'm sure that's the thing. I don't want to say that there isn't a problem in the Muslim community. I think there is. I mean, every community has its problems, but I don't think you can just see this as an isolated 1,000 people. I'm fairly sure there are quite a few, especially young Muslims, who explicitly or tacitly approve of this. Because of the reasons I've said. It gives them purpose, because they feel like they've been attacked by the Western world. And I think that's something where the Muslim community needs to have a lot more dialogue. But I certainly also see that it's not like this is the majority of the Muslim community. And I think that's important. And I think those people coming out is important, because that's what's going to foster this dialogue. But what I want to end this video by doing, and it's already quite long, but I think this is a brilliant article that someone wrote, and this is a Muslim who's writing this, and he's on ABC, which is a television network here. There's a commentator frequently, and he's brilliant. And I think his analysis of the situation just cuts to the bone of what's going on, and is very critical of his own community. So I just wanted to read this out. Remember, this is a Muslim talking about his own community and a subset of this community. And as I said, I think he explains it much better than, he has a lot more insight than I do. So that's why I wanted to read this article out. I'll also link it. This is Walid Ali. The title is "The Incredible Muslim Hulk Proves to Be No Friend of Islam Either." Where do I start? Perhaps with the viral image that will come to define this episode. A child who'd be 3 or 4 hoisting a sign triumphantly above his head, blaring, "Behead all those who insult the Prophet," while a woman, presumably his mother, thinks this is cute enough to capture on her smartphone. Alternatively, I could begin with the observation that the trailer for the anti-Islamic film that ostensibly started this all, Innocence of Muslims, is now a blockbuster with YouTube hits in the millions thanks largely to the protesters around the world who think no one should see it. No, let's start with the fact that so few of the protesters who descended on Sydney's CBD this weekend seem to actually have seen the film that so gravely offends them. When asked by journalists, they bluntly admit this. One even adding that she refuses to watch something so offensive. It's almost impressive how cynically stupid this is, but it's also instructive. In fact, this is the key to making sense of something so gobsmackingly senseless. The protesters, at least the ones quoted in the news reports, know nothing except how offended they are. That, you see, is all that matters. This isn't about a film, this is about an excuse. We know because we've seen it all before, like when Pakistani protesters vandalized American fast food outlets and burnt effigies of George W. Bush in response to the Danish cartoons. We know because so much of this weekend's ranting was nakedly gratuitous. Our dead are in paradise, your dead are in hell. Pardon? Which dead? Weren't we talking about a movie? This is the behavior of a drunkenly humiliated people, swinging wildly with the hopes of landing a blow, any blow, somewhere, anywhere. There's nothing strategic or calculated about this. It doesn't matter that they are the film's most effective publicists. It doesn't matter that they protest using offensive slogans and signs while protesting against people's rights to offend. It doesn't matter that they object to insulting people on the basis of their religion while declaring that Christians have no morals. This is baffling only until you realize these protesters are not truly protesting to make a point. The protest is the point. It feels good. It feels powerful. This is why people yell pointlessly or punch walls when frustrated. It's not instrumental. It doesn't achieve anything directly, but it is catharsis. Outrage and aggression is an intoxicating prospect for the powerless. Accordingly, it is not an option to leave an insult unanswered, because that is a sign of weakness rather than transcendence. The irony is that this grants an extraordinary level of power to those doing the offending. It puts them constantly at the center of your world. That's why when Gallup polled 35 Muslim-majority countries, it found that all of the gripes the Muslim world has against the West, amongst the most pervasive is the West's disrespect for Islam. And it is this disrespect that is the overarching grievance that subsumes others. Everything, global and local, can be thrown into this vortex. Swiss minaret bans, French niqab bans, military invasions, drone strikes, racist stereotyping, anti-immigrant policies, and yes, even films so ridiculously bad that left to their own devices, they would simply lampoon themselves. This is what gives Innocence of Muslims meaning. Not its content, but its context. It is a symbol of contempt, which is why protests against it so quickly turn into an orgy of anti-Americanism. So, Obama, Obama, we love Osama, they scream, mainly because it's the most offensive rhyme they can muster. Osama too is a symbol, the most repugnant one in their arsenal. How better to prove you exist than to say something outrageous? That the Obama administration immediately condemned the film in the strongest terms doesn't register, nor that the White House took the extraordinary and ultimately unsuccessful step of asking Google to pull the video. This is invisible to an audience of humiliated souls waiting desperately to be offended and conflate every grievance. Indeed, they need the offense. It gives them the chance to assert themselves so they can feel whole, righteous even. It's a shortcut to self-worth. The trouble is that in our digital world, there's always something to oblige. Anyone can Google their prejudices, and there's always enraging news to share with others. Entire online communities gather around the sharing of offensive material and subsequent communal venting. Soon you have a subculture, a sub-community whose very cohesion is based almost exclusively on shared grievance. Then you have an identity that has nothing to say about itself, an identity that holds an entirely impoverished position, that to be defiantly angry is to be. Frankly, Muslims should find that prospect nothing short of catastrophic. It renders Islamic identity entirely hollow. All pride, all opposition, no substance. Like the Incredible Hulk, observes Abdal Hakim Murad, a prominent British Islamic scholar, ineffectual until provoked. Sometimes you need a scandal to demonstrate an underlying disease. And that's the good news here. The vast bulk of Saturday's protesters were peaceful, and Muslim community organizers are lining up to condemn the outbreak of violence. But now a more serious conversation is necessary. One that's not about how we should be speaking out to defend our prophet and ourselves. One